Welcome, ladies, to the Real Estate InvestHER Show, providing inspiration, strategies, and insight to empower women investors to live balanced and financially free lives. Now, here are your co-hosts, Liz and Andressa.
Welcome back, ladies. This is Liz.
And this is Andressa.
Welcome back to the Real Estate InvestHER Show. We have a mini-sode edition and a very special one at that. And what are we talking about, Andressa?
Well, we have a special guest, and this never, ever, ever happened before. Here he is, Matt Faircloth.
Here he is on the InvestHER Show.
Yeah,
there we go. This never happened before. And today we're going to talk about couples who invest together. There's a lot of ladies in our community that are investing with the hubbies, and we want to talk about the journey, Liz and Matt's journey, and how can you learn from their mistakes? Should I say that, or evolution, and really like they're being very kind and open to share what happened to them, what is happening now to them, and where they're going. So this is going to be a very, very exciting episode. All right, Liz and Matt, welcome to the Real Estate InvestHER Show. We're so glad to have you both here.
I've heard amazing things about this podcast, especially one of the hosts, especially.
Do you like her?
I listened to this podcast in the hallway many, many times. Yeah.
We send you messages, Matt, through that.
Time.
I do. I know you do.
Different.
Good, bad. Yeah. And I've met women in InvestHER that have heard a lot of our stories. And I think it's great that that we're here to have this conversation, because investing with your spouse is a big part. I get asked that in my communities. I'm sure you guys do regularly. So I'm grateful that we're able to have this conversation with you today.
So let's get started. So you both have been married and investor closer to 2 decades, right? And I'm sure when people look at you both, I think that many of them think, wow, they got married, they got started in real estate, and it has been this wonderful linear evolution. And, they seem super cool. And
we are cool.
And of course you guys are cool. I think because you guys are cool and because you guys have such respect to one another, people don't believe that you guys did work and that was this like straight line. You guys found your role, your place in business out of the past since the beginning, did not pivot, did not change anything, because it's been perfect since the beginning. And I want to just open up the door over here for you guys to share. So Liz, let's start with you. Share with me like how you guys evolved when you got started. Who was doing what when that happened?
Yeah, no, and there's been multiple pivots. I actually counted 4 major pivots. So let's start at the beginning. When Matt and I met, we began investing together, right? 2004, we were dating. We weren't even married yet. And we bought our first property. And at that point, we had to have a lot of conversations of what we were going to do when we got married. I was just about starting a job in consulting. I really liked the work I was doing. And Matt was an engineer and really hated what he was doing. So, we both looked at, okay, if one of us was to take this on full time, we weren't making enough money to replace any income. It wasn't like what people do, what we tell people to do now. We just said, if one of us quits, what could we do so one of us can focus on growing the business full time? I was involved strategically and involved. I was just more on a part-time level. And then one person obviously taking care of, the financial house, if you will. And we made decisions accordingly. We, most people just, buy their first house, the dream home, right? The single family home with the white picket fence and what have you. And we didn't. We bought a house that I knew I could afford basis of what I was making in my salary. If literally we made nothing from real estate and it was a dismal failure. So that was the first kind of iteration. Second iteration was, if you want to share what happened in 2008.
Yeah.
2 years later.
Well, aside from like the real estate crash in 2008, Liz and I had this awesome idea that she should quit her job. And we were good savers, not we, she was a good saver. And she had and she handled our family finances and had piled up a reasonable amount of money, which was around what it would take for us to live for a year in expenses, right? So we had this great idea that she should quit her job and join me as full-time investing in 2008. Now, mind you, any folks know in the real estate world, 2008 is when you know what hit the you know what, and so the world, the real estate investing world got very, very different in 2008. And so Liz and I started working together in the most tumultuous real estate economy that we've ever seen, right? And so in some ways it was good. I'll say it wasn't like all terrible, but in a lot of ways it wasn't good. The good part was that, I was able to, we were able to leverage each other's strengths and, have conversations and relationships. We participated in some great programs like Leadership Trenton together and stuff like that. But above all else, Andressa, the problem that Liz and I had, and I think the reason why we didn't work, is because we didn't have clear job descriptions that really spoke to what each of us should be doing in the business. And that ended up causing Liz and I to step on each other. And above all else, it also made us sometimes feel like one was the other one's boss and the other one was the other one's boss other times, right? And I recommend that anyone listening that's thinking about investing with their spouse, one spouse should never be the boss of the other spouse. You can never make your spouse feel less than in the business, right? It needs to be equals all the time. They need to be equal voice, equal say, equal roles. And there's never a report to. Maybe collaborate with, but that's it. And it eventually failed. We didn't work out. And Liz, you can tell that conversation, which is a tough conversation. We got to about 2009 and the wheels started to come off, and
financially, emotionally.
The big stack of cash we had dwindled down. Realized we need more money, and emotionally we were just drained. And it was getting to the point where I knew that this arrangement was going to affect our marriage to the point where
it was affecting her.
Of course. And our marriage wasn't going to be there anymore. And I told Liz that if we continue down this road, we will get a divorce. We just will. And that doesn't mean I didn't love her anymore. I loved her extremely, as I still do.
Yep.
But I knew that love was not going to be big enough, and the pain that we were creating for ourselves was going to overcome the love we had for each other, and it was going to toxicify the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the house of cards would fall apart. And
so you went back to work, Liz.
Yes,
she did. Went back to the other one. And I want to just pause one moment here to say that it's so I want to highlight what you guys did in terms of, okay, this is not working, let's find a way that this will work, instead of, well, somebody needs to do this job here and I'm going to keep pushing through it and start building resentment to one another. And I see this very, very often. And people say, I am not going to, quote unquote, go back to my W-2 because now, quote unquote, I know better that I shouldn't be working. So I really commend you, Liz, for sharing this, because there are different paths. And I don't think that people talked a lot about it. So let's go there. You went back to your previous job. Consultant job.
And the irony of it is that I love what I did, and then I left on a wonderful note and they had a big going away party for me. So meanwhile, I got a scrapbook, I got a big going away, presents. And then a couple of years later,
you have like a welcome back party.
I had a welcome back party, but I went.
They didn't make her give the presents back or anything.
But I went back to my old boss, and that's where you have to continue to keep relationships strong. Big proponent of that, and I stayed in touch with my old boss. Always had a good relationship with her, and said, "Hey, what I just didn't work out the way I thought, and do you have some room for opportunity where I can jump back in?" And she did. And I was very grateful for that. So I did from 2010 to 2013, went back to, my old work, and stayed involved in the business. But we really had a big pivot in the business at 2010, where we really started to raise outside funds and grow our portfolio, focus on multifamily. That's really where I think our trajectory took off, if you will. And we really started to hone in on what we were great at. And then lastly, 2013 is when I left again, and I had my son, our first child. and had that conversation of what does that look like? Who's staying? Who's going to be home? Are we both working full time in the business? Because I left my consulting work at that point and we started to develop more income from our business. So that's the kind of trajectory. And at that point was around the time I met you, Andressa, and just full circle,
then
right?
From there.
And from there,
and then it just
you guys
changed our
know
life.
about what happened.
Yeah.
Matt's life, we're
now.
like, oh shit, now
Drop
I
the
have
mic
two to
somewhere.
deal with.
Right.
But I just want to end on, as you become a new mom and you're working with your spouse, because that was my only thing. I started, I had Zach at the time and we were working as much as I could work, right? And balancing a newborn. And I started to lose myself and what was important to me and my identity. And it was really hard actually, and especially you're dealing with all the different hormones and what it is to be a new mom. And you and I met and started to really talk about what we were passionate about. And that really gave me another focus. So, and at this point, trajectory, right? Fast forward, my role now is more on a strategic level. I'm involved in the business, but more just high level from a day-to-day operational perspective. I know our projects, I know what's going on. I'm part of conversations. I'm not the one making the day-to-day decisions. And I also, appreciate the role I have. We have monthly meetings, like I'm involved, but not day to day. And that works for us right now. And in my work now is more with InvestHER and supporting all the women we're supporting. So that's the long and short of the path and the roles.
Man, I heard Liz mentioning about this terminology that she talks about, like being a cheerleader, right? Instead of when you guys have conversations about DeRosa and different things, like what you need from her to be, instead of nitpicking or when Debbie's Liz brain comes up and you're just like wah, right? So when you look at what did not work and what is working now, if you could highlight, so the folks that are listening here really understand how her stepping out actually helped you guys tremendously. From emotional perspective, from not being in the business, because many people feel that they have to be in it. So her stepping back actually helped.
Well, it is, but right.
Okay.
It's so interesting perspective, right? And the story that Liz told is a good story, but I have a different perspective on that same story. Right?
That's about right for every.
I feel like sometimes Liz and I are living the same life, although it's what they said in Landmark, right? Like what I think, what she thinks, and then what happened, right? And everything she said is true, right? But there's also my perspective of this. That and I'll say this: every time there's been major change in DeRosa, 100% it came from Liz, right? She put Rich Dad Poor Dad in my hand, right? She introduced me to our very first investor. And as she saw that we were raising more and more investors, she said, somebody needs to keep these financials straight and run investor relations and be that point person and help people, this is, you wire the money here, Mr. and Mrs. Investor, right? To be that point of contact for them as things were moving forward, and somebody needed to write the newsletter and all that kind of stuff. Guess what? She did that, right? Once we had, when we had our son, in between the gap, there was a time period that I remember very, very clearly between 2013 and around, I want to say 16 or so, 17.
Yeah, that was
that in those couple of years that we had our son, and she was able to put in 10, 15 hours a week towards something, while she was also launching the juggernaut of the Real Estate InvestHER show. She was also helping me with investor relations, and that helped me really hunker down and focus on really taking care of the people that gave us money, being the custodian for people that had given us money, and develop a protocol around it, so that when she had stepped out of it, right, as she said, which was true, there was a clear role and delineation and job description. Liz helped me hire the right person to replace herself. And that hire was a phenomenal hire. And that was really a big catalyst for our company to go more and more professional and more focused on investor values and taking care of our people and transparency and all that, which was a foundation that she built before she stepped out. In that. So if I reverse engineer the company, there's been many times there are foundations of this company, the DeRosa Group, and mine and Liz's investing philosophy. There are foundations that we are built upon that she was involved in and helped architect and then stepped out of.
Wonderful. So now we're talking about roles, many different roles that a couple can have, right? And I want to touch base, and Liz and I had this conversation flying to Arizona, and she brilliantly said people did not have those conversations in 1950s because the roles were assumed, right? Women could not own a property, a bank account, or a credit card back then. Now we're having conversations. We are the first generation to have those type of conversations with the spouse, and this is really like the new roads. So let's dig into that, because I believe many couples that are married and navigating building their real estate business, they know something is off, but they're trying to avoid that conversation. They don't want to mess up the marriage, or the one other person to feel some way, shape, or form. But why having those like heart-to-heart alignment conversations are so important now?
Yeah, I mean, and you and I were talking, right? The assumption is that women in a sense, in that household, in a traditional sense, is going to take care of everything from a personal perspective, and work, and now create some generational wealth on the side. So there's a lot there, and the stress and the burnout is high. I think the conversations are a must. They're not even nice to have. They're an absolute must. If you're going to work, if you're going to have a successful marriage, quite honestly, just let's put investing on the side. To have that conversation of like, what does our personal life look like? Who's doing what? I mean, we all bring in not just the generational element, but we also bring in what we saw our parents doing. So, if we had parents, a single parent or two parents, what they did, and how that impacts us. So, even for us, I would say over the years, we did talk about who was running the household. We had that conversation. Who was staying home with our first kid, and then the second one. It was not assumed I was going to. I was working full time, if you remember. So the assumption was, what are we doing here, or what's that look like, right? And so we talked about it, and we had a really honest conversation around the roles, and I think that set us up for success. And I'll say though, as your relationship evolves and the family dynamics evolve and children evolve, the items in the personal household increases, right? So if you are taking on growing a business, and growing a family, and you can't keep doing what you're doing when you first got married. You do this, I do this. So, I have to say a quick story. Andres and I were talking, which we always do, a year ago. And I was sharing a little bit about our household and things I was doing. And I was doing a lot. And Andres is like, Liz, have you made a list with Matt recently where you're really delineating your roles? And it was her suggestion, her coaching. I said, no, I'm probably doing 90% of everything. And I have a willing and able partner, but that was a new evolution. Our kids were getting older. I was taking more, growing InvestHER with you. It just was a lot. So we did. I came home. I made the list of 25 roles in the household, not even the business, in the household. And we went over every single one of them and said, who is owning what in this household? And that has made such a difference.
Who's taking the trash out? I mean, seriously, it was down to the granular, who's responsible for interaction between our household and our schools that our kids go to. Everything. Who's cooking dinner? Who's buying the food that goes into the refrigerator? That kind of thing. We have a rule when you're home with the kids and I'm on a webinar, or I have a call, or I'm doing something professionally.
Who is the parent on duty? The POD. Who is the parent on duty? So if the parent is on duty with the kids, then they are in charge of putting their phone down and not being on a work call. Because if he's on a work call and I'm doing a work call, well, then who's giving attention to our children? And that's not the kind of parents we want to be. So the bottom line here is to really, really list out everything that happens in your household before you even talk about roles in the business. Because if you don't have your personal household in order, it's going to affect the business. It's going to affect how you play off each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I want to highlight what you're saying right now, because people sometimes do the reverse. They do the business, but they don't do the household.
Yeah.
First.
And maybe the resentment of one doing more than the other gets pulled into the business. Now that same spouse is doing things in the business that they really should be outsourcing. That it was just assumed they were going to do. Why would any role in a business be assumed a feminine role or a masculine role? That's just ridiculous. So yeah, it has to be discussed.
It's a good point. It was like, what spouse one is going to do it, spouse two is going to do it, or we're going to outsource it. And there was examples of, cutting the grass, right? And that was like, okay, we're going to outsource that. Neither one of us get joy from it. Our time is worth more than
but somebody's in charge.
Do it.
He is in charge of hiring the landscaper. And if I see the leaves out and I see something that doesn't work,
I hear all about it.
I'm like, hey, Matt, are you talking to so-and-so? Because I'm not going to go now text this guy. That's not, unless he needs help. And he says, hey, I need some support here. I need some help here. Great. I'll help you. But I'm not going to just step in and micromanage it, because then that's not delineation of roles.
And I just text him and say, hey, my wife said that.
Matt, so you took over dinner, right? I know you're a great cook. Thank God, Matt.
Thank you.
Not that you're not good cook, Liz, but we know, right? Where we stand on that.
I make really good meatballs.
I'm just sitting here and
smiling. Liz makes good meatballs, people. That's about it, right? So Matt, how did you feel about it? Because you also get joy out of cooking. So what you were saying to me is that it's just not like, oh, I need to do this because I get, so it's option one. Who gets it based on the skill set, the joy out of it, or outsource. So is that the quick way to find out who's gonna own it?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, listen, it's like I just can't wait to cook dinner every day, because that's the best point of my day. But I do enjoy it more than she does. I'm better at it than she is. Love you. But I also know that it is my contribution that I can easily take on for my family. And so for a lot of reasons, it's become just something that I do, that I'm in charge for the most part, like 90% of the time.
And meal prep, grocery shopping, you own all of that.
Yeah. I put all the, I do all the food shopping. I do all the food shopping and all the meal prep and like if I can't be home for dinner, sometimes I'll make a crock pot. I'll make it for her and just, okay, listen, put this on this temperature, if I've got the time to do that. Or I'll just tell her, hey, listen, I defrosted some chicken, your broccoli, make this. So if I'm owning it, I don't always have to do it.
But you think of it. It's the thinking
of
it.
Let's break that down, because I don't think we are used to talk about it, use this language. And I think it's so important, ladies, and all the spouses that are listening, to have a common language, right? So what Liz and Matt are talking about is the word owning it. So can we break down what owning is? Because a lot of women, we are the thinkers of it, right? And that's all the owning starts, is not just doing it, as Matt's saying, but the thinking of it. So can we break down what owning something? Let's use the dinner as an example, right?
Yeah. So when we went down that list, right, we listed out the 30 roles or 10 roles in the household, things in the household. Then you start to say, okay, what does that role look like, and what's included in that role? So meal prep or groceries includes meal prep. So we were very defined. We defined it just like you would in a job description in a company, right? And so once you have the role and you are very clear on what those duties are in that role, then you say, okay, who's going to own that? Who is going to be responsible for that happening? You can be responsible for something happening and not doing all of the items in it. Meaning I'm responsible for making sure all the outside landscaping happens. That doesn't mean that he's the one out there doing all the work, but he's making sure it's happening. So owning it is about owning the responsibility of that really coming to completion, if you will.
Can I give you a summary, Andressa? Owning to me means being responsible for the result, right?
Yeah.
So in whatever means that result gets produced, that could mean I go hire somebody. That could mean that I do it myself. That could mean that I empower Liz with all the resources she needs to make sure that this is easy for her to achieve the result. And that result is healthy food in ours and our children's stomachs. That's it. That's the result, you know, and at least 3 times a day. And for our daughter, 9 times a day. It's just about, in whatever means that I achieve that result, I'm responsible for it.
And the thinking of it, you and I talk a lot, Andressa, right, about the thinking. It doesn't mean you have to have all the ideas, because sometimes you're someone who may need some support around an idea. Maybe it's not that complex, but still, maybe there's a special meal that he's making for my dad. It's not like he can't talk to me about it. Like, hey, I'm going to make salmon for your dad because he loves fish, you know? I'm like, well, actually, you know what we should do? Like, so we're collaborative. Owning doesn't mean you do things by yourself either.
Sure.
You own it. You're responsible for it. You enroll who you need to enroll. You get the support you need to get, but you are the one that is at the helm of making sure it gets checked off.
Not necessarily cooking it. You can order it if you have a webinar, or if you're speaking it somewhere. Listen, I own it. It's going to arrive. Not necessarily you do it, but you get it. You get the result.
Yeah, if I'm in charge of dinner, then I'm probably the one that's going to implement that order and say, hey, what do you want? What do you want? The kids, what do you want? Because I own it, right? I think
you say rules of communication in this is very important. So in other words, say the one spouse, he owns dinner, he owns, you know, last night, I'll give you a perfect example. Last night, his friend came over, they're making wine. They go downstairs. Now it's 5 o'clock, right? I'm now downstairs. I don't see anything going on for dinner. And I'm like, oh, what's the plan for dinner? Like, so when you are owning something, you have to actually communicate that to your spouse or your family, because if you're going to need support, it's frustrating, right? It was frustrating. I'm like, hey, that frustrates me when I have to ask, what are we doing for dinner? It's 5 o'clock, right? Because now everyone's starting to get hungry. I'm just standing there in the kitchen, kind of twiddling my thumbs. I don't want to overstep, but I also don't want to, you know, so
I had a plan.
I know you
had a plan.
But the
plan was for you to make it, and then you did, and it was great.
But
I had all the ingredients. You had all the
preps.
Yeah, I did.
But the communication has to be there, because the other person might not know, and that's where ongoing communication to get these roles done is critical. That's all I want to say.
And I'll give one more thing, in that what's great about me owning a thing and then Liz owning something else, right? The great part about that is I know that I don't have to, that thing is not owned by her, and it can become less into my brain cells have to think about that thing that she's owning anymore, because I know that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to own what I'm going to own. She's going to own what she's going to own. And what a lot of times I've seen happen in our family before we had these agreements, is that there's just this understanding, again, the story that, oh, I thought she was going to make dinner. Or I thought he was going to get the kids up, or I thought she was going to do the laundry, or I thought she was going to cut the grass or find a landscaper.
And then resentment happens.
Yeah, and resentment happens because you're breaking the agreement I had in my head on who was going to do that.
Right.
And so you violated this mental agreement that I never spoke out loud, you know, right? And so that's how a lot of so you need to speak the agreements out loud, get on the same page. And then it actually empowers me. There's actually, Andressa, less that I have to think about. Because if I have to think about not the 30 things on the list, but the 15 that I take on, my brain cells are more dedicated towards what needs to happen on my plate versus her. It actually creates a lot of peace for me.
100%. I heard this. It's funny you're mentioning that, because yesterday I heard about this term unspoken contract. When people say, when they're getting resentment towards the other person, and they explode and they say, well, I did A, B, C, D, E, and you cannot do X, Y, and Z. What it's all about. So that is actually an unspoken agreement that in our head, in the person's head, right, they had that if they did those A, B, C, that somebody else was supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and that never happens. One thing that you guys recently introduced me to is the 4 entities, which is Liz, is an entity on her own, and she needs to work on, Liz needs to work on. Same thing with Matt, different. And then there's a third entity that is the marriage, the relationship between Matt and Liz. And the fourth is the business relationship. And I think many people just put it all in one bucket, and then we're all together. We don't even have a separate Facebook account. We're like Matt and Liz, as if it is just one, and everybody needs to work on different things. And I've seen it. We've done work together, separate. One thing that you said, again, in the air, Liz, is that, and it was brilliant to me. You said when one individual is working on their stuff and the other one is also committed to work on their stuff, automatically the relationship evolved. So the third entity will evolve. And then you can all synchronize with the business as well. But it always start with the individual. So I wanted to throw the ball to you guys here. Can we break that down a little bit, how that has been working for you guys? Matt, you want to start with that?
Yeah, well, I wrote a few notes down while you were talking, because you really got my wheels turning actually just now. And by the way, guys, this conversation of working with your spouse is a constantly evolving conversation that Liz and I have out loud, and that we've talked about having more like an InvestHER con and potentially in a book one day and those kinds of things, right? And so my brain's always thinking about ways to better this conversation. So the four entities, here's something I just wrote down, right? The four entities you said, spouse one, spouse two, the relationship, the business, right? I think there should be a spoken agreement, not an assumed agreement each week, a spoken agreement between the spouses about what we're going to do to grow all four of those things. And that might mean Matt's personal growth and Liz creating the space and the support and the reminders maybe that Matt has to do things to make himself a better, stronger person, physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever my growth mechanisms are. Same thing for her, right? And we need to do something that week to build a relationship. Could be date night. We like to read this. We get up before the kids do and read this book called The 5 Love Languages devotional. You know, sometimes we go on dates. Sometimes we'll just snuggle up and watch a show together. Whatever. Sometimes we'll just sit on the couch with a glass of wine and talk. Those are my favorite dates: is home date with a glass of wine and talk about the world. The two of us, right? Those are really feeding and growing the relationship, right? And then what are we doing to feed and grow the business as well that week?
Basis the roles that you have in that business.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. What as long as we all four entities are growing, and as long as we have agreements, spoken agreements on what each of us are doing to support the growth of those four things, you know, we're going in a direction that feels good, is going to hit our financial goals. It's going to keep us happily married in a great, thriving, growing relationship. And it's going to keep us both thriving and growing people that are in this four thing circle as well.
Yeah.
I love that. That sounds very healthy.
I think there's been a breakdown, but the breakdown happens when there's needs that aren't being met, that aren't being expressed, you know? And so meaning I don't have a day-to-day role in our business. So if I feel like we've missed one of our monthly meetings, I feel very disconnected. I feel very like, hey, I could really be adding value here and I'm not being tapped. And I feel useless. I feel not needed. And I don't like that. Right. That's my story. That's what I interpret. And Matt needs something different. He runs the business every day. It's a different, right? It's a different entity. It's a different relationship, I should say. So I've expressed that. And we continually to talk about that, where it comes across supportive, engaging versus
we're not perfect.
Nitpicky.
And we're not. What I just said sounds awesome and perfect, Andressa, but I can tell you that we don't perform on that level all the time. It is our aspiration to be on that every week. We don't give ourselves a 10 out of 10. It actually could be a good little fun thing to rate how we did on each week. I mean, and there are weeks that if I had to rate how Liz and I did on feeding our four entities each week, I probably would give us a 3 out of 10. There are other weeks I give us a 10 out of 10, but as Liz said, it's messy. You're on the journey together, man. And it's not something I don't know if the road of marriage is meant to be perfect. I don't think it is. I think it's meant to be a journey that you're constantly holding hands on and figuring out, hey, let's go left, let's go right, whatever. But you stay together and you constantly course correct and have spoken agreements on these things as you go.
Yeah, it's a commitment, right? So Liz and I in the airplane again have this conversation.
All good ideas come from the air, right?
and I was like, that's noble, Liz. She says something that is very noble. She's like, mindful of your needs and checking on it. And then I was like, that's very noble, Liz, for you to say that, because I believe that many women, they're so burned out, so tired, overwhelmed, we're tired, overwhelmed. They're like, I don't even I know his needs, but I don't even want to ask or check on him or fulfill those needs because I don't have it. I don't have it in me. And we had that conversation that it's also not healthy for the relationship when we don't fulfill each other's needs, but it starts with the first entity, right? We had that little chat in the airplane about that.
It's true, right? And I would say just you have to continually know what that other person needs and wants, needs and wants, and have the space to ask the question and to listen and then to course correct. If we don't do morning dates, if we don't have time for ourselves just to kind of decompress, I don't really know if I'm meeting his needs because it's so busy, right? It's so packed. And then it's like you're like two roommates living in a house. And when we stop and pause and we do like a reading and we have moments of just calmness is when we can say, how you doing? What's working, and what's not. But it's right. You have 2 minutes with each other between bedtime and dinner. You're not going to ask that question. You're just like, are you putting them down or am I? And I got to go do something.
Because we didn't think about that. Right. Right.
So
now it's the both of us dealing with
the space as a couple. You have to create the space to have an effective growth of those four entities. That's what I was going to say.
I love this. And I know that you guys are listening and the time just passed by and we would love to continue this conversation with Matt and Liz. But one thing that I will tell you guys, Matt and Liz are going to be speaking together at InvestorCon on May 18, 19 in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're going to put a link below over here. So Matt and Liz, what people can expect from your presentation?
So, well, it's a lot of what we just said right now, Andressa, and they can't, that doesn't mean that they can't come or they don't have to come because we're going to go, there's a lot more. We're going to go deeper dive. There is a phenomenal exercise Liz and I use called Continue, Start, and Stop. And we don't have time to talk about it now, but if they come to InvestorCon, they will talk about Continue, Start, and Stop. And I think that Continue, Start, and Stop has kept our marriage and our business and our lives pointed in the right direction so many times. And so we're going to get into an evaluation of what spoken agreements the married couples in the room have. And we're going to talk deep dive about where, like, just let's reality check, because it's fun to talk about where we want to go, but it's also even better. You got to know where you're at right now. You got to look yourself in the mirror. So we're going to be going through some exercises and looking ourselves, the audience and ourselves, Liz and I, in the mirror about where we are specifically on the four entities that we talked about today.
So that right, generational wealth can happen. And it happens on your own terms, but it really starts with the person, and it starts with a couple and a partnership. And so what does that look like? And you have to talk about blind spots and certainly how do you get realigned when you think you're aligned. And so all of that's going to be weaved through to really create that financial freedom journey and a roadmap, it doesn't happen overnight, but it's all part of creating the financial freedom you want. This is the work that needs to happen. You can't get there without the personal and obviously focusing on the business strategic goals, right? To put assets in place. But that's the technical stuff that everyone knows what to do. This is the work that really is the core. And then you can position into assets to buy to get us to our financial freedom goals. That tends to be the easier part in a lot of ways.
The foundation, right? I feel that those are the foundation. Those are the written agreements. And I think that once it is around a structure, the conversations are going to come easier because the spouse are going to have to look into what they're looking for separately, and then they come together. And that it's we are going to offer hands-on guidance for all the attendees to do that. I can thank you both enough. I love you both. And we have been in this journey for so many years, and I cannot wait to continue doing this next to both of you. Matt, you have been a super supported hubby for Liz and a business partner for me behind the scene. Not many people know the role that you have played behind InvestHER. So I really want to thank you publicly for that, for all the support that you have given Liz and I. Can't thank you enough, my friend.
You've told me I'm the only male investor.
That's right.
Honorary member, right? Yes, it's an honor, and I am in awe every day at what you two are building, and it is an honor to be the support for that, and words of wisdom if I can, or every here and again, if y'all let me show up on the podcast and talking about what it is to be married.
You always have great ideas. Matt's like,
yeah.
I have an idea. I have an idea.
I do. I'm an idea machine.
Yes, you are.
2 of them are good. I have lots of them. Only a couple of them are good though.
Thank you so much, both. And we can wait to see what you guys going to do at InvestorCon. And at InvestorCon, we'll have a special surprise for all the attendees.
More surprises.
Yes, more surprises.
Thanks so much for listening. Bye. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to receive updates on our next interviews, go to our website, therealestateinvestor.com. There, you can subscribe to our show, become part of our InvestHER community, and get updates on upcoming episodes.
If you like our show, please share it with other women who would benefit. And don't forget to leave us a rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And as always, we encourage you to take one action as a result of today's show and put it into motion so you can live both a financially free and balanced life. Thanks for spending time with us.
Ciao.